Bonjour, bonsoir, good evening everybody. Welcome in Bozar on the occasion of Europe Day. Today we mark the anniversary of Robert Schuman's declaration, which in 1950 launched the European unification. For writers and thinkers at my department at Bozar, this day is always an ideal opportunity to take stock. Where does Europe stand? And where is it going? Traditionally, we present an edition of May Day magazine. I should show this, sorry. Together with our partners, Are We Europe, Evans Foundation and Open Society Foundations. We commissioned pitches this year for stories, interviews, photo essays, illustrations that tackle this year's theme. And the theme is a bit ominous, the age of crisis. Climate change is forcing us to take drastic measures, but that is easier said than done. The COVID crisis is almost over, or maybe not, but the war in Ukraine has entered its second year. This led to an energy crisis, an economic crisis due to high inflation and shortages. The refugees crisis is still not under control and is fueled by the climate crisis and ongoing wars all over the globe. Meanwhile, more and more European countries are confronted with anti-democratic populist organizations and political parties that are not compatible with the European dream of Schuman and the other founding fathers of the EU. There were not many founding mothers, I must admit. Or we didn't see them at that time. 2024 will be a crucial year for Europe, with the European elections coming up. Belgium, that will be president of the EU in the first half of the year, will play a very important role in trying to forge a pro-European coalition for the future. Tonight we will present May Day magazine, and I will talk with 6 smart and interesting people who can shed a light on this age of crisis. I will present them as they come and join me here on stage. The entire evening, Kim, who is not here yet, one of the best Belgian cartoonists, will share his views on the discussions with you, and he will be drawing his cartoons live. At the end of the evening, Lisette Ma Neza will give her artistic impression on the themes we will discuss tonight. We plan to wrap up the talks a bit after 8 o'clock, but please don't run away. After a break, Beatrice Delvaux, commentator at Le Soir, will interview Giuliano da Empoli about his novel, The Wizard of the Kremlin. The interview will be in French. The rest of the evening will be in English. So first of all, I want to invite Teresa O'Connell to join me on stage. She is the editor-in-chief of May Day magazine. She works for Are We Europe, a media platform that believes in a united Europe. Welcome, Teresa.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
You look happy.
I'm super happy. I just saw the magazine, and you will concur with me that it's very bright and...
It also smells good. That's always the most important. No?
I can confirm.
Okay.
I would highly recommend each and every one of you.
This is the first edition, the 4th edition of May Day magazine we're making together. And Are We Europe has been the partner from the beginning. But can you tell us a little bit more about your organization in the first place? What is Are We Europe and why do we work with you?
Sure. So Are We Europe is an independent media organization based mostly between Brussels and Amsterdam. And we work on a range of projects with a host of media and cultural partners such as Bozar on projects that support and facilitate cross-border journalism and cross-border collaborative media production, both in print, online, training journalists as well.
If people read the magazine, and that's what you should do when you leave today,
they
will see that the people writing or working for the magazine, making photos, etc., come from all over Europe. How do you reach out to them? How do you get this network of journalists and creative people to work with you?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and thanks for asking it. First of all, we have a network of over 1,000 journalists and creatives all over Europe, and we really, really believe that local and locally based journalists are really the best to tell the stories about a given place, and of course, they're the ones that they're going to know places and cultures and situations the best, and they're also going to be able to tell those stories in the best way. And I think Mayday magazine is a brilliant example of that, because through our social media and online networks, we've reached out to a bunch of people, and they're all in this magazine, and yeah.
It always surprised me when you send out the pitches for the magazine. I'm a journalist myself for my entire life, but the speed with which you assemble all these ideas from people all over Europe, it's magnificent. It's great. So, but the theme of the magazine this year, and we chose it in your place, was the crisis, the age of crisis. So I guess it's a very pessimistic edition of Mayday magazine, or isn't it?
The theme might sound as being really pessimistic, but we really chose this theme and turned it on its head because we wanted to challenge the idea and the feeling that I think is inevitable in this day and age, that it's impossible to do anything about the huge crises that we're faced with, both individually, as communities, as species even. I think it's so easy to really have that feeling of the inability, the sort of inaction, and sometimes we just get so exhausted by this feeling. Actually, I think that this magazine is paper proof that coming together we can really face challenges and hopefully come out on top.
Could you run us through the magazine and show us a few of the highlights and maybe to illustrate what you were saying now?
Yes, of course. I think that we can go from this, this one. Cyrillic and Clay is a really interesting story about a Russian-speaking bookshop in Vienna, in the center of Vienna, that has become a safe haven for Russian speakers from different countries and different communities who are living in Vienna, either because they chose to live there or because they ended up in Vienna as a result of the more recent sort of geopolitical events. And as well as a bookshop, it's a art-making space. So they all work together. They run clay and pottery classes. And they run this sort of form of art therapy that really brings meaning and community to these people who might otherwise not find themselves so at home in this new place.
We're in a difficult position now, because to be Russian today outside of Russia is not so easy.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's super surprising is that it's not just Russians who go there, but also Belarusians, even Ukrainians. And they've kind of created community among groups of people that would otherwise elsewhere perhaps not be coming together in this way. So I think it's really interesting.
And the next one?
This is a really cool, as you can tell, photo series by Alice Payot. She's a French photographer. But this is actually set in a natural park in Belgium, in the north of Belgium, the Lommels Sahara.
Yeah,
and it's actually the result of a polluting zinc factory in the 20th century. Mm-hmm. And this photo series really plays on this idea of pollution, but also kind of the freedom of living in nature and having a relationship with nature. So we thought it was a really interesting, again, example of how human resourcefulness becomes activated in situations of
So it's a scar from the Industrial Revolution, but now it's a national park. Yeah.
Exactly. So again, and people go and play around with found objects there and make photo series there. That means that, you know, again, you're making the best out of a situation that wasn't that great.
This article is about Ireland, and I remember it's about extreme right, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Which is, of course, a topic that we will discuss later on.
Yes, absolutely. And this article is, again, very interesting. It's about how the shortage of housing in Ireland is a big problem that is actually pushing some people towards the far-right groups who are really, really sort of capitalizing on this rhetoric that there is no space for immigrants in Ireland. So it's an interesting intersection of a very real sort of problem of insufficient housing policy and rhetoric that really plays into people's emotions and but however on a superficial way. And what's happening across Ireland is that groups of people come together to oppose this far-right rhetoric and actually show people that immigrants are welcome, and especially given that Ireland, and I would know something myself, due to my family history, has such a long history of migration, it would be, it would be incredibly absurd that immigrants wouldn't be welcome in Ireland today.
Okay. The next one, if there's some...
Yes. I'm trying to link, so this one is about maker spaces in Ukraine and how they have become activated since the 2022 Russian invasion to produce...
Please maybe just explain the word makerspace. What's a makerspace?
Well, I think you'll have to read the article to get the proper explanation of that. However, so it's an evolution of DIY culture, and makers really promote repairing and fixing and making things out of open source software, and in that way it's a much more collaborative culture than just capitalist consumerist culture that we're used to. And in that way they are forming a network across Ukraine that is actually stepping in where communities have a need for objects or things that it might otherwise be difficult to provide them with, roads blocked and transports and everything that is obviously being affected by.
I learned from the article that nerds will save the world.
Let's see about that.
Let's see about that.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Don't know if we still have another one coming up. Yeah.
Well, of course.
Preview of something that will come later. Yeah.
Exactly. We're super excited. Both that we had Lisette compose some new poetry for the magazine, and that she's here to perform some of it tonight. So I'm just as excited as hopefully everybody.
I will give more to say a bit more about her at the end of so don't run away. Okay.
And I would say let's not spoil too much more of the magazine content.
No, we won't. We won't.
Yeah.
The magazine is on sale here tonight. You can buy it, and you can also buy it on the website of Our Europe and in our bookshop.
Yes,
at Bozar.
Right.
So please take a copy and give it to all your friends and family. Teresa, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And
thank you so much.
let's do it again next year. No?
I'd love to, yeah. Okay. And just before I go, thank you to all of the Our Europe team that worked on the magazine. Obviously, this was not I couldn't have done it alone.
Okay, great. I would also like to thank Pamela Peters, who is the coordinator between Bozar and
everybody
Europe.
at Bozar for also organizing the event, and yourself too.
Thank you.
I will take this with me.
Okay. The theme of our magazine is very broad, and we need people with a synthetic, but also with a more prophetic mind to help us to see clearer in how these crises of today are all linked together and how they can be solved. I will talk to Giuseppe Porcaro, who is in charge of the outreach activities of the European think tank Bruegel. He concentrates on technological changes and how they affect policy making and democracy. But he's also a science fiction writer, an author of a novel about Europe and the future of democracy. He will be joined by Tinatin Tsertsvadze, senior policy analyst at Open Society Foundations. She has devoted her career to EU foreign policy with a focus on human rights, civil society, justice, gender, equality and democracy. So welcome Giuseppe and Tinatin. It's always a surprise from which angle they come. Yeah. I want to start with you, Tinatin. The theme of our magazine, as I said, is very broad, the age of crisis. But could you pick one crisis that worries you the most today? Or is that a trick question?
One crisis that worries me today most is the war that's happening on the European continent, war in Ukraine, which started last year officially, but it started much earlier in 2014. And I think it is not an isolated crisis that we are facing. It's a result of multiple crises that Europe has faced before, from degradation of the rights and freedoms, from multilateral institutions not being able to respond adequately or have not been adequately equipped to respond to the crisis that we have been facing over the last 10 years on this continent. And on the other hand, the dependencies that Europe has created on the vulnerabilities that this trade and economic relationships has created, which we have faced firsthand last year when the war started, and we had to quickly find the fixes. So it's a multiplication of the factors that brought us where we are. And we use the word peace very easily in this continent, but I think peace cannot be established without justice and accountability, without international institutions functioning properly, without rights being protected, which is core of what Europe is based on.
If we talk about, we will talk about Ukraine later in the program, but if we talk about the crises, are they linked to each other, or are we just confronted with a series of crises that just by coincidence have arisen? Because of course the Ukraine crisis has led to an energy crisis, led to an economic problems as well.
I think they are linked together. I don't think these are isolated crises. Why, as you said, Ukraine crisis led to economic crisis, interdependencies, the supply chains, but also why the war started. It didn't start out of nowhere, right? We have seen rights and freedoms degrade in Russia considerably. The dissent has been shut down, essentially, to prevent any criticism. So this is all interlinked, including the Europe's role globally, right? How it stands globally, what kind of role it takes, how it speaks out in a united voice. So I think it's hard to say this particular crisis is isolated. I think it's ingrained in many different crises that led us to where we are now. Because war doesn't start out of nowhere. It has roots somewhere else, which we have not addressed adequately before. And this is where we are today.
Giuseppe, what are your thoughts about these questions?
Well, I can only agree with the fact that all the things that are happening are quite interconnected with each other. I think that there are several ways of seeing all these problems, all these crises that are unfolding. One is to look at them in an isolated manner. The other way is to look at them at a systemic manner. And I think this is what we should do more and more as an exercise. Look at them in a way that is holistic, because otherwise we cannot solve one crisis without looking at the rest. I mean, like we mentioned Ukraine and, for example, the energy crisis. We cannot mention this without mentioning the green transition, the decarbonization challenge that we have in Europe. We cannot mention this without the fact that we need to cooperate globally in order to ensure that we are going to fight climate change. And then, of course, other problems like the big challenge that is like the big elephant in the room of our times, which is like the decoupling of the global system that we are seeing under our eyes on the weeks that are passing by between the United States, China rivalry, and so on. So things get global, and even, I would say, since you speak about science fiction, I would say even not just intercontinental dimension, but intercosmic dimension, because we have a new space race, which is becoming more and more part of this geopolitical system that we are describing.
Tinatin, Open Society Foundation wrote an article in the Mayday magazine, and it turns around the question that, of course, we need to protect and respect national states and natural sovereignty, but we must acknowledge that there are areas in the European Union, and that there are areas where the European Union and not the state provides the safer room, as he wrote. So, and that the crisis we are facing now, they may seem at first sight geographically limited, but all of these crises in very soon become European or even global. But it's of course a very difficult question, because to dream of a more united Europe, and that's what we do today on Europe Day, is not very popular today, because there are all these member states. There is a lot of tendencies to take back power from Europe and to try and solve all the problems on their own, on our own. So, is there a way out of this dilemma? Because it's of course a danger that Europe is facing today.
Yes, certainly there's a lot of tension between the sovereignty of the individual member states and what EU as a united bloc can do. And the crisis that we are facing in Ukraine is one. There's a climate crisis, there's a migration crisis, there's a challenging of the norms and standards, there's a challenge of the international law by some, voiced by many globally. There will be no single state globally or no single EU member state that can deal with the scale of the problems alone. So that's why I think this is from where it comes. We cannot underestimate the importance of sovereignty of each individual member state. But we are at a time where very cumbersome decision-making processes make you very slow and bureaucratic and unable to be the actor it could be otherwise in taking decisions much faster, quicker, responding to the crisis that we are facing. So it is in that prism that we think that there should be much more reform of the foreign policy, essentially EU foreign policy. We need a strategic vision, what the EU foreign policy is about. We need a single voice to speak globally. What do we see EU, how do we see EU globally? What kind of norms, standards, and values EU upholds globally? And we need a system which is flexible and reliable. And lastly, we need a system that EU is one of the biggest markets globally. It has to leverage better its economic power to achieve its political objectives. And I think we are not quite there yet. And it's not the story Europe is telling itself. Europe is not telling itself the story that it's a powerful actor in economy, it's a powerful actor in politics, and it can do it better. And I think there is a job to be done there to become more strategic, more flexible, more agile, and responsive to the challenges we are facing today.
Giuseppe, you wrote an article in Media Magazine, which is a science fiction article, and what struck me there is that by talking about evolutions that are going on today and going further maybe in a more absurd way or in a way that is likely to science fiction, we start to realize that we're on a very delicate path. The subject of your article was something like subscription citizenship. Could you explain that, and why is it not so science fiction as we think?
Yes, this was a little bit of a provocation about what our daily life is becoming, the fact that we are more and more linked or locked into systems that where we subscribe for services, which then gets us to basically get certain services that might be like basic, or like you get, let's take Netflix or any other platform that we use. So more and more the services that we used to, or like even Apple Music or Spotify, we used to buy things and own products and so on. Nowadays, this concept is being replaced with the subscription-based. And I wanted to push this concept into the political realms for two reasons. One, because it could really happen that you could see in a world where the fine line between what is private corporation and statecraft is being blurred more and more. I mean, we've been seeing in the past things like companies like Google, for example, starting to invest in things that are pretty much state-like kind of prerogatives. On the other hand, you have the whole debate about what is citizenship today. What is about looking at, for instance, migration was mentioned before. The refugee crisis was definitely hinted in what was said. You really have at the moment something that is considered to be a universal right, which is citizenship, but in practice it is linked to a sort of subscription. And therefore I wanted to push this to the further limits and say, okay, what if we have to pay a subscription to be European Union citizens? And
like we had in the 19th century, you had to pay taxes to be able to vote.
Exactly. That was a little bit the provocation. But the other thing that I wanted to put in place and in motion is to use it a bit as a methodology. A methodology not to have what the futurists would try to do, which is about predicting the future. The article doesn't try to predict the future, but tries to be coherent and somehow consistent with the scenario. So using science fiction as a laboratory, because we cannot really go into the future and then come back into the past. So the only thing that we have is a leap of imagination about how we can imagine the future to be. And a lot of time we are locked in a way of thinking about the future, which is a one-way street. And unlocking the possibility through science fiction of having multiple futures, you also unlock the possibility here in the present for political activism to strive for a different future.
Okay. Tinatin, I wanted to talk, I will take the opportunity, you represent the foundation here. People are maybe not aware what foundations do, and maybe sometimes they have also a negative bias because there is a lot of criticism from opponents to foundations because okay, they represent certain values, and if you represent certain values, there are people who represent other values. But how can what's the precise role of a foundation in the democratic debate and in the democratic system? And what, could you explain more why, if for your opinion, why we need foundations or need these organizations that organize around ideas without being, let's say, a political institutions?
Yes, certainly we are not a political institution. We are a philanthropic foundation, and we do, among different things we do, we support frontline civil society organizations who stand up for the values that we believe in. It's open society values, which is to support, uphold democratic principles, rule of law, fundamental rights, and people who are really at the front lines of defending all those principles. So to act as agents of the change. We of course welcome the open dialogue and different opinions. So this is our core principle, that if somebody has different idea, of course we have to hear them. And we are also the spaces where we can be an intellectual debater, convener for government institutions, civil society, or think tank networks. So what we do essentially is to create spaces and to enable others who believe in the same values to pursue their work. So there is nothing hidden in this. We do it very openly, and we support frontline groups essentially to implement their work, to protect open societies, to protect democracies, and to protect the rule of law, and to live the lives they believe is the best for them.
So it's thanks to organizations like yours that organizations and people that share these values in countries where there is no democracy can still function.
Exactly, we support sometimes very small groups, sometimes very big groups, but it's just to enable. Sometimes support is so crucial for the small groups which operate in countries where otherwise it will not be possible for them to operate. So these are very different kinds of supports we provide, but it's essentially enabling the space for civil society with its very broad understanding what civil society stands for. It can be organized, non-organized, but civil society, which is the outside of the state of the power, to organize themselves and to implement the ideas they believe in, yes.
Okay. Giuseppe, you work for a think tank. That's something completely different as a foundation, but it also has, the general public doesn't really know what think tanks are doing and what's their role, and maybe they're a bit suspicious about it. Could you...
Indeed, we try to spend the money of foundations, so that definitely we are not the same. Well, the role of a think tank, it's very basic, simple. A think tank is a research institute which makes research which, instead of being geared towards academic and theoretical side, is geared towards policy action. So it's policy research, policy-based research. And in the specific case of Bruegel, is an independent think tank, which you can have research institutes which are attached to one cause or another cause, or one, let's say, political family or another political family, especially at national level or European level. We have very good think tanks which are from different political families still doing, even though they are political, they're still doing a very good job in terms of research. In our case, we are a neutral think tank. Why I'm saying that? Because what is important to do is indeed distinguish the role of independent research from the role of the policymakers and the politicians, in the sense that it's through a think tank base itself on the research in order to provide policy advice and policy proposals, but we don't want to substitute ourselves to the political debate, the political conflict that needs to animate the democratic conversation.
So as long as the facts that you base your advice on are verifiable, then...
Exactly. I mean, like, as long as the facts are verifiable, as long as there is an evidence-based policy which is not based on alternative facts or fake news or whatever you want to call it, then the solutions obviously are up to debate, because the solutions are part of the democratic process.
Democratic process, okay. I would like to thank you both, and enjoy the rest of the evening, and enjoy the magazine,
Thank
of course.
you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I don't know whether you knew or remember that 2022, last year, of course, was the European Year of the Youth. It was to be the moment to move forward with confidence and hope in a post-pandemic perspective. You should imagine that young people during the COVID crisis were in a very delicate position. They were not really affected by the virus, although some of them, of course, became ill, but it was a virus that attacked older people. But still, they suffered a lot from the lockdowns, etc. So Europe decided to make 2022 the European Year of the Youth. But it was also the year that the war in Ukraine started. And we at Bozar last year also wanted to make a May Day magazine completely devoted to the young people of Europe, which was called Next Generation, Please, which is also the title of one of our wonderful projects here at Bozar. But when the war started, we decided to throw away all our plans and make an entire issue on the war. And the event we organized to promote the magazine last year, for the ones who were there, they will remember it. They will not soon forget it. But today I want to make up for what we didn't do last year. And I want to talk to two relatively young European activists. The first is Anuna de Wever, and she is playing a home game here in Brussels. In 2019, she led the protests of Youth for Climate. 35,000 young people came to Brussels to protest the policies on climate and to ask for more courage. Today she works for Climate Action Network, and she tries to influence European climate policy, but she's also active in grassroots organizations because she is convinced that all the big changes in the world are initiated by civil society. Anuna will be joined by Latifa Oulkhouir from France. She started her career as a journalist for Bondi blog, and that's the first pure player in France. It was an internet medium that was created after the riots in the banlieues around Paris in 2005. Now she works for Le Mouvement, which is an organization that brings together more than 100,000 citizens all across France. Le Mouvement works for a more just, democratic and ecological society. So I would like to welcome Anuna and Latifa on the stage. Anuna, we'll start with you. In 2019 and 2020, you and your friends at Youth for Climate proved that it was possible to raise support for a more radical climate policy from scratch. You weren't organized before, you just started something, and it became so huge that it was one of the largest manifestations we had worldwide for climate, for more support for climate policy. Can you remind us how you started it and what was the success formula?
Yes, and hello everybody. Thank you for coming tonight. It's always weird to be nostalgic about these things because I don't feel like it's over.
You're too young to be nostalgic.
I'm too young to be nostalgic, first of all, and I don't feel like all of the work and the people that you've seen on the streets, they're still there and they're still doing the work. But to reiterate, in 2018, I think, or beginning of 2019, I released a video to ask for my peers to come on the streets with me and demonstrate for a more ambitious climate policy. And I did that because Belgium refused to join the High Ambition Coalition, which was a coalition at the time at a COP of countries that wanted to be more ambitious with their climate policies. And them not doing that for me, I directly translated that into the human cost of the lack of ambition in our climate policy. And so I was outraged. I mobilized people, thousands of people came on the streets for 20 weeks on end until the elections. And what was actually really interesting at the time is that at the beginning of the strikes, politicians were applauding and they were cheering for us and they were joining the demonstrations and they really felt that youth engagement was a good thing and we support this younger generation standing up. And after a while, they started understanding that we were actually calling them out and calling for political accountability and not just mobilization or raising awareness. And that's, I feel, when everything turned and it became such a polarized discussion, when at the end of the day, it's a discussion about saving this planet and saving the people that live on it.
Mm-hmm. If you look back on what you achieved, was it worthwhile? And do you think you really influenced European climate policy? Or is it just one building block of many?
No, I think it did a lot. So I was actually in a conversation 2 years ago with Frans Timmermans, who is the vice president of the European Commission. And he literally said, without the youth climate movement, Fridays for Future, globally, we would have never had the Green Deal. And I do believe that because also now that I'm working for Climate Action Network and I'm involved in a lot of the EU policy discussions, I can really see how big the impact was of that event, but also how big the impact is of a lot of us young people being in these organizations, being in these think tanks, being still on the streets, doing the grassroots work, the civil society work. It continues to be super impactful. So I really think it was a paradigm shift, and I really think we're still at the start of everything that's going to mean.
Was it also a crucial event for your generation? Like for my generation, it was the demonstrations against nuclear arms in the 1980s when 100,000 people were in Brussels. Is it for your generation the same significant, let's say, massive mobilization that we will see people in 10, 20 years referring to these protests as being a defining moment in their lives?
I think that the climate strikes were as significant as Me Too strikes and Black Lives Matter strikes. And I think they keep coming because we continue to point out the fact that we are living in crisis. And what the climate movement is and was about is about climate justice. It's about equality. And I think in that it's really important to acknowledge that the climate movement and the climate strikes and the Black Lives Matter strikes and the hashtag Me Too strikes and all of those movements need to be united, because at the end of the day, we are not talking about emissions and renewables and solar panels. It's about a system that created the climate crisis. And I think understanding that system and what built that system, being patriarchy and colonialism and white supremacy and inequality and exploitation and extractivism, it's a lot of bad things, and we're going to need a lot of movements to talk about those things, to come together, to put one front and demand political accountability for that.
Latifa, you come from France. We've seen all the images on television of the mass protests in France that are going on for months now, but still the French government hasn't changed its plans for the pensions. They have even pushed them through Parliament without putting them to vote. Can protest and civil action really change something in society, as Anuna is testifying here?
Thank you for a question. Thank you for inviting me, and hello everyone. I'll try to answer in English, and if it's gonna
No, if you can do it in French if you like. I can translate.
Switch in French. No, I think it's kind of the government hasn't changed its reform, and but something changed in the civil society. You know, I remember that kind of 1 year ago or several months ago, we were saying in France, oh, we kind of lost our knowledge on this field. I'm in protest, and you know, doing etc. So this what happened showed us that people are still willing to go to the streets to make strikes and try to defend their social rights. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But at least people kind of find again, I guess, some hope in mobilization, and it was very hurtful and hopeful to see these thousands of people in the streets, and that's what I'm going to keep of this. And it created a lot of things, you know, in activist movement. You know, at Le Mouvement we launched a petition, you know, asking for asking the government to stop this reform. So a lot of things has been done, and I think we have to keep that in mind. And I think it's the political engagement is kind of never-ending work in progress, and we learn from every struggles. And I think the next time it's going to be a victory.
Isn't there a risk that if you have all these people enthusiastically protesting and really believing that they can change something by hitting the streets and coming up there with hundreds of thousands of people, and then the elected politicians say, okay, we don't follow you, that there will be more anti-political sentiments among the population that will say, okay, that's like Anuna said, politicians loved us in the beginning, but then when it turned out that you were serious about it, they pulled back and even started attacking you in a very virulent way, because it also has its dangers, doesn't it?
Yeah, of course. And in fact, for France and this moment particularly, the problem was the fact that the government used legal tools, but it doesn't mean legitimate ones, and he preferred not to, you know, make the parliament vote for this reform. So it's if we spoke of democracy, it's a kind of something that's a little bit scary, what have been done. So I think it can, gave, sure, at the end of this kind of protest, people are a little bit disillusioned about what can happen. But I think after some weeks or some months, if something else happens threatening social rights of people in France, I'm sure that people are gonna be there again.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. There is next year there will be European elections. For the first time, also 16-year-olds can vote. What's your expectations about it? It's a system that's not so easy. It has a large threshold. You have to register to vote, which we don't do normally in Belgium. You just get a letter in your mailbox and you go out and vote. What do you expect from this new?
I would also love to hear your response. But I think to me, it's a total game changer, to be honest, because first of all, there's a lot of people that are excluded from the democratic process, right? There's a lot of also undocumented people in Belgium, people who are not seen as human beings worthy of being a part of the political debate. So I feel like lowering the threshold through age is one first step that we can make the democratic process more democratic, but there's a lot of steps to follow. And I do hope that 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds and 18-year-olds are also able to put those things on the political agenda that are not there right now. And that's why I also deeply believe in youth political participation, and not necessarily even being inside of the institutions, but being aware of what is going on and also having a seat at the table of those negotiations and not just being put away, which is what is happening to us all the time now, is that we're being put in these panels, not right now, but in a lot of the big political panels, or where we're asked to give speeches, or where we're asked to have meetings, and we're just constantly tokenized because our youth voices are not being taken seriously, although we do very serious work. So I'm really happy that a lot more people are included, but I really do think it's only a first step to make the elections actually a very democratic process.
What are your expectations of the 16-year-old?
I think it's a good thing if we have also some public policies to include everyone. I would not like to see only 60 years old privileged person to be able to vote. I know how it's difficult to know. In France, we have, for example, to register before voting, and how it is difficult just to tell to young people, but also people who are the less privileged on the society to register first and to vote after that. So I know it's not just a question of age. For the government, it's also what we do after that to make this rule and very, in fact, efficient in real life.
I want to go back to the climate crisis because it also has an important place in the magazine. Of course, the climate crisis is the most important crisis because it affects the entire planet. But still, you always link the fight to reduce CO2 to human rights. It's a board. You touched on that before. Could you elaborate a bit more on that? Because it's important.
I'm also gathering that that's not very clear for everybody, which is so weird to me, because when I started the climate strikes in Belgium, it was always from a human rights perspective, from understanding that the climate crisis is going to increase all of the inequalities and all of the human suffering that already exists today. And we don't have leeway for that. And so for me, understanding the climate crisis is understanding that it's going to be and is the biggest human rights crisis in the world. But therefore, in order to solve it, we don't just have to talk about those emissions. We need to talk about the people that are most affected, the people that have been most oppressed and exploited by creating this system that has created the climate crisis, and how we include them in the debate. And it was really funny because even last week, a lot of the workers from Deleuze, which is a big supermarket store in Belgium, but it's a very, very big multinational chain, were striking because they're not treated properly at all. And I joined them vocally, and I was like, yeah, we need to all come on the streets and we need to join the unions as well, and the whole civil society should fight for these workers and workers' rights. And I got so much backlash, and a lot of people came to me and said, I don't understand why you're fighting with them, because I thought you were a climate activist, not a human rights activist. And it was really, really confusing to me. So maybe this can also be my message for tonight, because I truly believe in one-on-one impact and direct impact. I think the most impact that I have is with the people closest to me. When we're having conversations about the climate crisis, let's make sure it's about the people that are living on the planet and not just the planet.
Latifa, I want to talk about your work previous. You worked as a journalist for an independent medium. Maybe you could tell us a bit more how it came into being into these crucial years of 2005, 2006, which were very turbulent years in the history of France. But I would also like to talk about the importance of independent media platforms, because there is a lot of criticism to mainstream media, also social media. I think you both were victims of, let's say, hate and all the horrible stuff on social media that you can have. But my question is, are media still capable to organize a democratic debate that we need to empower citizens to make the well-considered choice when they go to the elections, or when they behave as a citizen in society?
Yeah, maybe it's because of my formation or previous job, but I still believe in media to kind of raise awareness toward some subject, and kind of serious work of journalism. It still exists in France, in Europe, across Europe, etc. That's there is no debate on that. But about what I've done before, I think it's quite. It's kind of the same thing, you know, in journalism, but also when you talk about political and civic engagement, it's all about what the information that people have as citizens have. Sometimes we just need, even if we don't, strike or sign petition online or do kind of digital campaigning, it's about what the information you get and how we want to talk about that information and how it is important or not. And I think in journalism, it is that it's the information you choose to present to people and how you present this information. There are a lot of good journalists who do the work on climate questions, but also social, migration, etc. So I still believe in that, and I still believe that even if we talk about crisis, and as you talked about the Bondi blog before, that I was the director of that media. It was born on the context of crisis, and it's also the proof that crisis can be a kind of fertile land for some initiatives, because sometimes politicians and also foundation and all people that can help changing society kind of are more aware of some problems. I also still believe in media, and I think there are an important work to do on social media also. I see a lot of activists today doing the work that some journalists have to do, even if some of them do the good work, but sometimes you can find very, very precious informations coming from people who are more aware of the kind of the reality. They are more aware because it's their expertise. So that's kind of my belief my belief on that.
Anuna, you once told me that you consider social media not the place where you can try and convince people that they are wrong, or do you convince people
I think I've been in too many Twitter storms to still believe that. Because I agree. I think that what is happening right now is that the media is normalizing very harmful narratives. And every time that I am trying to find a critical view on policy that is being written, or statements from politicians, or anything that is happening, I always need to look for media that is not in Belgium, first of all, but also on the margins, or newspapers that are not very well known, not in the mainstream, because I really see that mainstream media is defending the status quo. And it makes it so difficult for civil society organizations or grassroots movements or individual activists to go and fight against this narrative that is being normalized by everybody. And you can really see it. I've read this study a while back where they've seen how many racist comments have been in the newspapers in Flanders. And over the 10 years, it has just increased massively because of the political landscape. And I think that is really dangerous, because I do think that grassroots organizing changes everything, but people need to be informed to be able to do that.
Okay, I would like to thank you for your comments, and I hope to see you soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, now our last talk will focus on the question if the European Union is still strong enough to tackle the problems we are facing today, the crisis that we're talking about today. Our first guest is Stefaan de Rynck. He's head of the European Commission's representation in Belgium. And he was also a senior advisor for the Brexit negotiations that were conducted by Michel Barnier. He wrote a very interesting book on that topic, and you can read an interview with him about the book in our magazine. Stefaan is joined by Shada Islam, one of the most influential commentators on Asia and on EU affairs here in Brussels. She worked for a number of think tanks, writes columns for The Guardian and other publications, and she also started her own consultancy called New Horizons Project. But first, we will listen to a statement on video by Alexandra Matvichuk, and she leads the Ukrainian non-profit organization Center for Civil Liberties, and she was one of the 3 laureates of the Nobel Peace Prize in 2022. She couldn't be here today, but she sent us this video.
The time of crisis reveals people to express their best features, to be courageous to accept reality, to make difficult but right choices, to take a burden of historical responsibility. When we speak about Russian war against Ukraine, it's not just a war between 2 states. This is a war between two systems, authoritarianism and democracy. Putin tries to convince the whole world that democracy, human rights, rule of law are fake values because they couldn't protect you during the war. We must respond to this claim and demonstrate justice. When large-scale invasion started, the European Union took the narrative, "Let's help Ukraine not to fail." Ukrainian people convincingly proved that people fighting for their freedom and democratic choice with support of international partners are much more powerful than even the second army in the world. It's time to switch to another narrative. Let's help Ukraine to win fast. There are huge differences between "let's help Ukraine not to fail" and "let's help Ukraine to win fast." We have to fill accountability gap because all these horrible war crimes which we face in Ukraine, it's a result of total impunity which Russia enjoyed for decades. Committing the same war crimes in Chechnya, Moldova, Georgia, Mali, Syria, Libya, other countries of the world. Russia have never been punished. Russia believe they can do whatever they want. We must break the circle of impunity and establish special tribunal to hold Putin, Lukashenko, and other Russian war criminals accountable. We have to prove that democracy is working, rule of law is effective, and justice is possible, even though delayed in time. It's so important in our part of the world, where Russia, for decades, uses the war as a tool how to achieve their geopolitical interest, and uses war crimes as the methods how to win this war. Justice is precondition to peace in our part of the world.
Shada Islam, welcome. In her speech, Alexandra Matvichuk calls Europe to do more for Ukraine. The position must change from "let's help Ukraine not to fail" to "let's help Ukraine to win fast." I think it's a plea to support with more military support for the Ukrainian army. I don't see any other way to win the war fast than by supplying more arms and maybe troops. How realistic is this to expect that Europe will effectively do more on the military side of the conflict?
Right, thank you very much, Karl. It's wonderful to be here to share the platform with Stefaan, old friend and colleague. Look, I'm already, I think, like a lot of people, very impressed by how far we've come, how quickly, and how rapidly we've taken decisions that have to do with things that we never really bothered about, which is arms and weapons and military help. We're doing a lot already, and I agree with Alexandra, of course, more can be done. But let's look at what we're doing at the moment and say, this is a very important first step, and let's continue. The sanctions as well, I mean, we're now on our 11th package. Also, sanctions are not that easy to implement. So I think the focus now has to be on actual implementation to make sure that they're enforced and that countries that are breaking the rules, either directly or indirectly, are actually taken to task. And I think these things are very, very important. I'm actually very impressed with the solidarity that has been shown by people across Europe as well. And I think that's very important because, as Alexandra is saying, this is a war of people as well. It's a regime against a regime, but it's also value systems that are in conflict with each other. So actually we could do more, and I think there are ideas out there to go further, but I actually have to say, and I know also offering Ukraine membership. This has already been agreed that they will become members. Of course, as we all know, negotiations take a long time. But these are important steps. And I think Europe has shown the world that it can move fast when it wants to, and it could be quite united on certain basic principles when it wants to.
Stefaan, what are your thoughts about the speech?
No, I think, first of all, she's right from where she's talking, and I think we have to respond to it. On the war crimes, Ursula von der Leyen was in Kiev today and announced the creation of a new center to document the war crimes. We already enlarged the Eurojust mandate to make sure they have extraterritorial reach as well. We have joint investigation teams with member states. So on that front, we are taking another step today and last week. And then people ask us, can you do this under the treaty? We are liberating some money to support the production capacity in the European defense industry. And as Shada said, these are unprecedented things. We have been talking about this for 20, 25 years, right? And Schuman was, at the time, we were talking about the European defense community, and then the French parliament voted it down in '54. So it's been there for decades, that discussion, and it's really going into a serious acceleration with this war.
But still, there is no reason why this war can't continue for the next 5 years, 10 years. It seems endless. From which point can we start hoping that peace talks can commence, and who can take the lead in that? Can we do that? Can Europe do that? Can the United Nations do that? It's from that side there is utter silence. There is nobody talking about a way out, a peaceful exit strategy. And is there a peaceful exit strategy?
Well, I don't have a crystal ball, but I will say that people have started talking about it, because you said, rightly, Karl, wars can go on, and while we talk about Ukraine, it's been a year now. What I find very, very sad is that there is a war going on in Europe, and our lives, yes, we had an energy shock, and yes, our food prices have risen, but our governments are prosperous enough in Europe to subsidize all of that. But this war is impacting on what we call the global south, developing countries across the world, whether it's Africa, Latin America, the Indo-Pacific, the Middle East. There are repercussions across. I mean, there are countries that cannot afford to pay their loans, so there's a default happening in many countries. Energy crisis. We in Europe, we can buy expensive energy from the Gulf countries or from the United States. Many other countries cannot. So there are load shedding, what we call load shedding in Asia, which means that factories work part of the day only, or people only get energy or gas in their pipes for about maybe an hour a day, so you have to cook then. So this war is devastating. Has had a very bad impact on Europe, of course, and we've taken in displaced people, and this is very honorable. But across the world, people are really suffering. And don't forget, we've had the pandemic before as well. Mm-hmm. And that also was a very unequal thing. There was vaccine equity is a very important topic now. So we need this war to end. And your question is, can Europe do it alone? I don't think so. I think there needs to be a coalition working together to get that peace. And we need to pull all the strings we can with Russia. Who has power over Russia? I think China does. And China is also a friend of Ukraine. I know it took Xi Jinping a long time to call Zelensky, but he has finally done it. I think Emmanuel Macron, the French president, is trying very hard to get things done. So I think the talks are going on, but everyone's waiting for the right moment. And frankly, I'm not a military strategist. I don't know when the right moment is, but I would say don't let this war go on. It's hurting the people of Ukraine. It's hurting the world.
Mm-hmm. Stefaan, your thoughts about it?
Well, there is a Chinese peace plan. It's very selective, obviously, and so we need to try to exploit those things diplomatically. There are many countries around the world who don't feel as engaged as we in Europe, to say the least, from this. And it's a bit a paradoxical situation. But to get to peace, we first need military action. Clearly, and it's what was said there, and that's right. Ukraine needs to win this war.
I will go back to the more general theme of the night. Can we say that the crisis we suffered and we're still in today brought us closer together? Like in the COVID crisis, there was this joint strategy for the vaccines. There were also changes in the financial rules of the Union. We are borrowing together now. I remember the financial crisis where every country was keeping his wallet protected. The war in Ukraine led to a more integrated energy policy, etc. But do you believe that these signs of unity will become durable, or will they disappear when the crisis is over?
No, I think they're durable because unfortunately we're living in a perma-crisis kind of moment. So, and you started with the reference to Brexit. I think if you look at this crisis pre-Brexit you just mentioned, when the financial banking crisis happened, Merkel said everybody sweeps in front of their own house, the whole street will be clean. So, national action. Euro crisis was terrible in terms of divisions between Greece, Portugal, and the Netherlands, other countries. When Brexit happened, there was a unified reaction. You referred to COVID. The first weeks were very tough. There was a scrambling for protective material, masks, countries outbidding each other on the world market because people thought that member states said, well, this is a national competence, health protection of my citizens. I'm going to act. It took a few courageous decisions there to purchase vaccines together, to ensure free movement of goods and people still with all the restrictions that we had, but cross-border as well. So it took political action from the Commission in the COVID times. In Brexit, the unity came immediately from member states. And if you look at the Ukraine war, the first sanctions package was immediately adopted, a temporary protection of refugees. First time we activated that directive, so the Ukrainian people didn't have to ask for asylum. They got it automatically with all kinds of rights attached to it. All these things were taken very quickly as decisions, and we have to sustain that unity. That's, why I don't have a crystal ball to say it will survive. And there's some threats from within the EU as well, from within some countries, notably rule of law was mentioned here a few times. Certainly the Commission and member states, we have to act quite forcefully on those issues because that could internally weaken the EU and we should avoid that. But it's only when we are really united as 27 governments towards these crises that you can act effectively.
Are you as optimistic as Stefaan as it comes to the unity of Europe today, or is it just...
So a couple of things, Karl. I mean, I have to confess the unity of Europe at the moment is there on Ukraine, but on other issues we know it isn't. And we need to work on 3 points, I think, to actually matter in this very fast-moving 21st century. The first of all is, let's talk about strategic autonomy. Let's not just brush it aside. And I don't think there's much unity in Europe about tackling that very important question. Of course, Emmanuel Macron has come out with it. He believes that strategic autonomy is very important for Europe, and we will not matter on the global stage unless we stand on our own 2 feet. I'm telling you that. As someone who travels across Asia, Africa, the Middle East, we are important when we have our own voice. It doesn't have to be one voice, and I don't think 27 countries that are so different culturally, democratically, all of the different things, we can't have one voice. But if we are together on certain key points, I think that's when we matter. So strategic autonomy for me is a question, a debate that has to take place. And ahead of next year's elections, I think it should be an important thing. Europe cannot afford to be just de-risking with China or working on defense apart from the United States. We need to actually make sure that we are autonomous and we can behave in an autonomous manner on foreign policy, on military field, on the economic field, all of that. The second thing is, can we navigate this multipolar world? Because the question I get from a lot of people in Europe is, no, it's not multipolar, it's still unipolar, it's still bipolar, but really it isn't, and it's not just the Ukraine war that is showing us that, but the fact that countries like India, like Brazil, South Africa, all of these countries are demanding a seat at the table, and they don't want to fall into this US-China binary trap. They really, and Europe can provide guidance for that. And the third thing I worry about, and I'm sure you do as well, is populism and the rise of racist statements, discriminatory statements, discriminatory action and policies in the European Union. Anuna just now talked about how the mainstream media is quite complicit in disseminating and amplifying the voices of people who are racist, discriminatory, there's systemic racism, and there's populism. And it's not just the populists, and I'd stop here, it's also mainstream parties which are embracing the rhetoric and the policies of the populists. So those are the 3 dangers I see when you talk about, will Europe be united?
With European elections coming up, we risk having a very strong coalition of anti-European members of parliament in the European Parliament. Is Europe strong enough to... Because the, let's say, pro-European parties are not always that friendly for one another either, so you have to make a coalition of the willing with people who do not like each other most of the time. just to protect the basic foundations of Europe. How important are these elections of 2024 in that respect, for the rule of law, for democracy, and the values that we are celebrating today?
Yeah, I think, first of all, they're very important, but I would also say in 2019 we had the same prediction, that the populist and anti, and that didn't turn out to be true, and also thanks to a higher participation rate, and for the first time more people participated in the elections than in the previous one. It had always gone down before. So that's one thing to say, but the second thing, for me, we have made tremendous progress in terms of protecting the rule of law under this commission. Also thanks to member states, but also thanks to what the Commission has said. We have 3 issues now. We have recovery and resilience plans. You don't get money if you don't meet milestones for Hungary. That's on judiciary independence. New law voted this week, goes in the right direction. Conditionality for the budget and conditionality of cohesion policy. And
that means if you don't...
yeah, well, to make it concrete in terms of the Hungarian case, it's about academic freedom, it's about the child protection law, it's about the fundamental rights of asylum seekers. All these things are now linked to specific spending programs as well. And so these things will survive the election. So we have some instruments there to protect the rule of law and to protect fundamental freedoms. And I think that's a fundamentally new phenomenon as well.
Belgium will be president of the Union in the first half of 2024, the period also of the elections. The 1st of July, it will be Hungary. The contrast is very big. Hungary is not, let's say, so pro-European these last years. Will that put pressure on Belgium to try and build this pro-European coalition in Parliament and in the Commission before the 1st of July? And is that überhaupt possible?
I think that the Belgian presidency will be probably in 2 times. There will be a rush to finish legislation between Council and Parliament that is still there. The Migration and Asylum Pact may well be one of the ones that still have to be finished. There's a lot of climate issues that are still, in terms of the energy sphere, that may still be open. Maybe new economic governance rules, deficit, debt. Who knows what the Spanish presidency will do? So that will be the first part. And then I think the Belgian presidency, if I speak on a personal basis, there's a chance there to set the agenda for 24-29. Of course, who will be appointed as Commission President, European Council President, that doesn't depend on the presidency only, but the presidency can play a brokering role and also can come up with ideas for 24-29 and what the new strategic agenda of the EU should be.
Are you optimistic for that outcome next year?
Yeah, I am. I have to say presidencies do matter. I agree with Stefaan that they set the agenda for the next 6 months or so. But under the new system that we have, which is of the troikas working together, and of course we know that the Commission has increased its leverage, if you like, its power, I think they matter less than before. But definitely, I think with Sweden at the moment, and Spain coming in the next presidency, and then Belgium, we do have a progressive agenda, if you like, on issues like the Green Deal, on issues to do with, I would say, our values as well. I'll just give you an example. So I think it's very important that we have an anti-racism agenda. I'm hoping we couldn't do a big anti-racism conference under the Swedish presidency because this government actually has a deal with the Sweden Democrats, the far right, that those issues of migration, of values will not be so high up on the agenda. So I'm hoping that Spain will take that issue of values, inequality within our union, because inequality is a big issue. And I think that following up, we will have similar sort of engagement and commitment from the Belgians, which I think believe very much and are founding members of the European Union. So I think, and then the main thing will be to do some damage control so that Hungary, when it comes in, if it's still the same government, we live in democracies, so governments change, then we have done already the guardrails, if you like, big word at the moment, so that Hungary can't really upset the agenda. So we really are sort of, at the moment, I have to confess, in Europe, going from troika presidency to a troika presidency and hoping that the good ones, the good eggs, will defeat the bad eggs.
Okay. I would like to thank you both for your insights. Before we come to the end of the presentation of Media Magazine, we will all give the floor to Lisette Ma Neza, and she's also in the magazine. Please read her wonderful poetry. In 2018, she became the Vice World Slap Poetry Champion, and the Flemish public broadcaster VRT called her our own Amanda Gorman. Today, she will bring us a poetic performance that touches on the themes that we discussed today.
Hello, everyone. How are you? Good? How was the evening until now for you? Interesting? Do you recognize what we've been talking about in this age of multiple crises? I don't know. I think there's also within all these systems and all these systematic or crises that are a bit above us, that are political sometimes, and become personal. There's also this personal, the crisis is within ourselves. Yeah, let's start with that. Never waste a good identity crisis. Never waste the stories before you. Never waste your heritage. Never waste an identity crisis. Go home and get it. Go back and take it with you. This is the Matonge Blues. This is Europe too. This is a home far from home. Oh, this is the way we do. This is the way we feel. This is the way we deal with life. Singing, this is the Matonge Blues. Oh, and this is the way we do. Oh, and this is the way we move. And this is the way we move. This is the Matonge Blues. This is the way we live, the way we give, the way we take, the way we are. This is the way we eat, the way we heal, the way we grieve, the way we talk. This is the way we walk, the way we laugh, the way we pain, the way we hear, the way we feel. Singing, this is the Matonge Blues. And this is Chateau Rouge. Oh, and this is Gare du Nord. And this is the Balmer Blues. So I went on a quest, searching for a story on this continent, intertwining with another continent, searching for Afropia. I read this book, Afropean by Johnny Pitts, and I was inspired. For the first time, I realized this is my continent too. And the story of Europe is also my story. And my story is the story of Europe. And I found home, not in a place, but in a person or in a dish, something that tasted like my mother's food. I found home in the middle of Paris, in a bookstore. I found home, I found multiple homes, far away from home. Kiss on the lips that never been kissed. A kiss on the lips that has never been kissed. I have the Matonge Blues. I have the Matonge Blues. Kiss on the lips that never was kissed. I will tell you everything When I see you again, I'll see you again. I am a motherland, my mother's friend and my sister's dance. So I fly back to where I'm from. I'm where I never went, I'm who I never met. So I have the Matonge blues, a kiss on my lips that never been kissed. Oh, I am a motherland, I am a motherland. Oh, I am my mother's friends, I am my sister's dance. Oh, I am everywhere. Oh, I am a refugee, I am everywhere. I'm everything we left out. I have the Matonge blues. So these are the Matonge blues. So this is the way we do, the way we live, the way we are. This is the way we think, the way we share, the way we break, the way we heal. Singing this is the Matonge Blues. Oh, and this is Chateau. Oh, and this is Pepite Blues. Oh, and this is the Balmer Blues. Oh, and this is Gare du Nord. Oh, and this is Coco Bell. Oh, and this is the way we move. And this is the way we move. Thank you. Thank you. While everyone was seated, and I was seated as well, and we were listening to these conversations, I tried to follow, and I tried to summarize in a poetic way. We like to improvise. So imagine you have this personal crisis, and it's so within you and so personal and so individual in a way. And then one morning you wake up, you look through the window, and you see that it's not just you. And you see that it's around. Can you play that for us? Kind of starting within. There's no need to go to the other side of the road or the other side of the table, the other side of the world to find ourselves anymore. Or to find a story that we resonate with. The history of here is the history of us is the history of me. I need your story to have my story. No I story without us story. The age of crisis. The age of chaos. The year of youth. The youth of hashtags. The world after COVID, a war between two systems, the impact of protest. Never too young to be nostalgic. Everything changes. And not a thing is ever over. No. No. No Green Deal without Gen Z. Calling out your lack of accountability. We make allies out of our enemies. Clay and pottery classes. We find belonging in this, within this alienation. Oh, a renaissance even in Brussels now. Our expectations? Our expectation is youth political participation. No seats but tables. They say nerds might change the world, but I think it might be TikTok girls, hashtags and magazines. We turn these scars into stories. We turn the scars of the Industrial Revolution into national parks. Oh, there's this before us and there's this multiple after us. Oh, this is the age of uniting our weeping. We turn our interdependency into communities. This is the age. This is the age. Today is the age of strikes and human rights. So this is the age. This too is the Matonge blues, the Me Too blues. Oh, this is the age. The age of healing and reconnecting with our roots. The age of too much information. The age of technology policies, activists doing the job of journalists. Oh, this is the age. These Twitter storms. This fake news. We fight, we turn our phones on flight mode, but we fight these tendencies through tenacity. This is the age of crisis. But not in a pessimistic way. The days of science fiction. This is the next generation, please. And multiple futures. Thank you. My name was Lisette Ma Neza, and this was Pieter Samoa.
So we have come to the end of this first part of Europe Day. I thank you very much for being here. Please buy Mayday magazine on your way out. Enjoy the rest of the evening and have a happy Europe Day. Thank you.